Hello, and welcome to Watch My Pipe. My name is Kurt. Thank you again for tuning in. Today is a very special episode, as this is the inaugural episode for my new channel, Wednesday Watch Review. This is something that I've wanted to do for many years, even before I began pipe smoking. I've wanted to do this for quite some time. Now, in my previous videos, I mentioned that I would be doing my first episode on the Watches and Wonders 2021 that just took place. However, it occurred to me that I should probably go back and just do a quick introduction as my first episode and show you some of the watches I've accumulated in my collection over the past 20 years or so. One thing I must mention, many times over the years, people have come up to me and have asked how I can afford all the watches I have, and at one point I had a total of 15 in my collection. But I've whittled it down over the years to a nice set of 7, essentially one watch per day for the week, and I pretty much keep to that. But again, this is something that I've been doing for the better part of 2 decades, and it's not like I just ran out to the watch dealer and just dropped down tens of thousands of dollars on a whole bunch of watches. So let's jump in and I'll show you what my collection is and a little bit about each watch and how I came about it. And I'd be more than happy to answer any questions that you might have in the comments. So again, I've been collecting watches for the better part of 20 years. And if you go back to even in high school and college, I had some of the more basic watches that you can think of. Fossil, Swatch, and the like. It wasn't until about 2002 that I purchased my first luxury watch. And that was a black wave dial Omega Seamaster Pro. It was 42 millimeters actually. And I still remember the day I bought it and how excited I was. And that's really what it's all about. Yes, these watches are expensive, but it should bring you joy. The one thing I say all the time is don't chase the hype. Buy the watch that really sings to you. Buy the watch that you want, damn anyone else and what they think. And that was actually the case with one of the watches I purchased. And I think I even mentioned it back in one of the pipe reviews or tobacco reviews. I believe it was episode 3. Anyway, about another year or two down the road, I started expanding into some of the other makes. And even though at the time Panerai was pretty hot and huge, I had looked at them a little bit, but there was just something about it that didn't work for me. But Breitling, if I remember correctly, something was just fascinating about it in their design, the heft, and even the chunkiness. So the next watch that I purchased was the Super Avenger in blue. It's a chronograph, and it was a monster. And I'm talking 48 millimeters monster. During this time of my life, I wanted, and I think almost every watch collector wants a Rolex. Now, back in the early 2000s, these watches were half the price of what they are today, and I'm talking regular sale price, not on the gray market. You could pick up a Rolex easily from a retailer in stock, and depending on the model, probably get a pretty decent discount even on the steel model. So right around 2003, 2004, there was a buzz that Rolex was going to come out with a 50th anniversary Submariner, and there was going to be something unique about it. Now, again, this was 15 years ago, pre-internet really, and I'm just going off the top of my head, but when that watch came out and I saw that green bezel, later to be known as the Kermit, I just had to have that watch. Now, at the time, I had been buying jewelry and watches from my regular dealer, and it was a stroke of pure luck when I walked into that store because I was going to get something else, but more on that in a minute. They had just received a Kermit in, and the person who had put a deposit bought one elsewhere that day, and I literally walked in the door 5 minutes after he had declined the purchase. It was the luckiest moment of my life in buying watches. I couldn't get my credit card out fast enough. Now, the story also brings a little pain because almost a decade ago now, I went through a divorce. And if you've ever gone through a divorce, it is ugly. I had to sell all of my watches, and it still pains me to this day just thinking about it. Especially the fact that I purchased my Kermit back in 2007 and paid retail, which was off the top of my head right around $6,400, I believe. I'll have to go back and check a Rolex guide for that, but I believe it was right around that number. But today, that watch on the gray market probably fetches $14,000-15,000. So between that and the other two watches, when I sold them back in 2012, I probably made $9,000 off the whole deal. In today's dollars, in today's market, those three watches would probably pull in closer to $25,000 today. But needless to say, it pains me more in ways than you can imagine, but you move on and move on to bigger and better things. And I can say that in more ways than one. How truly blessed I am today. So, without further ado, let's get into my collection, and I'll fill in some gaps along the way, but just follow me along here. So, first up on the list is my Rolex Submariner 116610LV, aka the Hulk. So, I acquired this watch in early 2017. And at the time, I had the option of picking between two of them. Long story short, had I known what the market would explode to today, I probably would have bought both of them on the spot. But this is the watch in my collection that I've had the longest now. And it's probably getting close to needing its first service, but this thing runs like a champ. Like most every other Rolex, it runs to within 1 to 2 seconds a day, and you really can't ask for anything better. After this, I bought the Batman and had that watch for probably about 6 months, possibly longer. And again, this was before the watch boom happened, and I really wasn't loving the watch, and eventually went back to the dealer and traded up for a Submariner two-tone golden steel model, the Bluesy. That watch stayed with me for quite some time, but I no longer have that watch today, and there's a very specific reason why, and we're going to get to that in a moment. But keeping with the sequence, the very next watch I purchased was the Omega Speedmaster Speedy Tuesday. It's a limited edition, and it commemorates the 5-year anniversary of Speedy Tuesday from Fratello Watches. Again, going back to one of my earlier videos where one of the reasons I love this watch so much is because of the lume. The radials in the dial are filled with a luminous material, and the entire watch glows bright green. Now, this brings us up to roughly the latter part of 2019, I want to say. And at this time, I was living with my fiance now. And as we fast forward through the year to Christmas, she had got me one of the most amazing gifts I could ever imagine. And it was my 2001 Rolex GMT Master 2 with the Pepsi bezel. Now, a real quick story going back to what I was talking about before. Back when I bought my 50th anniversary watch in 2007, I was going to buy this exact watch and then opted in for the Kermit. Back then, I remember exactly what I was going to pay for it because I was going to the store that day to purchase this watch. Including tax, the dealer was going to sell it to me for $3,500. This watch today probably fetches closer to 12 or even 13,000 on the gray market. I don't think anyone knew or expected any of this when watches took off in value just a few short years ago. But this was a gift from my fiance, and this watch means more to me than you could possibly know. So, fast forwarding about another year, I found myself wanting to get a Tudor. For the longest time, Tudor wasn't available in the US market, and there were a few that I were considering, and ultimately I landed on the Black Bay with the red bezel. And this is unique because at the time, Tudor had switched to the in-house movement, and this is the very last of the Black Bays that still have the ETA movement. One of the other Tudors I was considering was what I now have today in the Pelagos Blue, but prior to my acquisition of this watch, I had been collecting other models for the previous 2 or 3 years, which also included a Breitling Navitimer and two other Omega models. It was a Speedmaster Blue, Speedmaster Aquaterra Ryder Cup. There were some others that came up along the way, but that made up the pretty good amount of my collection for the better part of 2019 and 2020. Then, about a month after I purchased this Tudor, I also got my Pelagos in blue, and I got a call from the dealer saying that they had a solid gold Rolex Submariner that had just come in. For me, this is and was the epitome of all watches, and I ended up trading most of the rest of my collection in my Breitling Navitimer, my Omega Speedmaster Blue, Speedmaster Aquaterra, and my Rolex Bluesy for the solid gold Rolex watch. Now, if you do the math, that doesn't add up to the sale price, but I did put additional money down, and the story doesn't end there. In my quest for watches, there are still a few more that I'd like to have. And at the time, again, this was just last year, there was a very credible rumor that Rolex was coming up on an anniversary for the Milgauss, and that model was going to be discontinued. And hopefully, possibly a new version was going to be coming out. Now, there were a couple different models, but this is the Z Blue dial with the green sapphire. And it's a watch that I have wanted probably ever since the darn thing came out. But that is the status of my collection today. It's something that I have been doing for the better part of 2 decades, and I just wanted to share that with you today. Quick side note, the Rolex Closs that you see here was actually a gift I received all the way back when I bought my Rolex, the Kermit. It's not as crisp and fresh as what it used to look like 15 years ago, but It's a polishing cloth and something I'd probably never part with. Well, I mean, I probably won't say never because everything has a price, right? So, there you have it. This is my collection, along with a little more of the history of how I came upon these watches. I also took a moment here to straighten up and make it look a little cleaner there for you. It's a little difficult trying to do 3 or 4 things at the same time, but I hope you enjoyed this video. Please give me a thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't done so already. Then, this weekend will be the full review on GLP's Gaslight, which I am thoroughly enjoying. Thanks again for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.